But this notion of greasing the groove completely changed my conceptualization of strength training.
It's a very easy and very simple way to train. You're going to get bigger. And before you know it, you're stronger. And at the same time, you have developed muscle. What's really fascinating is
Health Lab.
I'd like to talk about neural drive. I attribute you with popularizing, maybe you invented it, but certainly popularizing the term like greasing the groove. But this notion of greasing the groove completely changed my conceptualization of strength training. Because I was weaned more or less trying to run cross country or trying to put on strength and size. Kind of a numbskull, young male approach to things. But
that's what we do at that age.
It served me reasonably well.
Sure.
I'm grateful that I included both. However, I was so tuned to this notion of training a body part, creating an adaptation, then waiting for the adaptation to occur, and then training the body part again. You know, the arguments are all over the internet, 2 times a week, 3 times a week. And then I came across this concept of greasing the groove, which as a neuroscientist felt is so intuitively correct and turns out to be correct. But the idea that more frequent training or practicing of a movement opens up a tremendous number of opportunities for development of strength, of size, hypertrophy if one wants. Once one understands this concept, you no longer look at this split or this many reps or that many reps or this volume or that volume. All that is important, but you can start to think about it through the lens of the nervous system. And to me, it was like water in a desert to finally encounter something that brought together all these different concepts. So could you please explain for people what greasing the groove is?
So, ladies and gentlemen, grease the groove, we are talking about, let's use an analogy. Let's imagine that you are a bow hunter and you work in your garage, and then you walk out of your garage and you shoot an arrow, and you just go back to going about your business, just working in your garage. This is the best way to practice your skill in small portions in a spaced out manner. What's really fascinating is traditional education and traditional strength training. It's based on the cramming model. So remember cramming for an exam. So you're studying at night and you somehow squeak by and you pass. Okay, great. And then a couple of days later, you happily forget everything. So in contrast, imagine that let's say you're studying a foreign language. You write words on cards, and at every opportunity, you're standing in line in the bank. Lesser mortals are fooling around on their phones through your deck. Like, oh, can I translate this word? I go, put it back in the deck, flip it over. Then next time you're in some other place, you do this again. So this is an example of space practice versus the traditional mass practice. And the evidence of the superiority of space practice is just overwhelming. It goes back to the 19th century, and there's at least more than 1,000 papers published on that. Strength is a skill. The Soviet scientist, Stepanov was his last name, he was measuring the electrical activity in the muscles of weightlifters who were pressing overhead, and back then the press was one of the competition events. And what he found is, as the athletes got stronger, after some months, the EMGs started dropping off when they're lifting the same weights. So pretty much he found out that the nervous system activity became more economical. They were able to try less hard, yet still lift the same weights. Or pretty much they could try harder and lift even heavier weights. And hypertrophy could not explain that, because in the 50s, the Soviets were very anti-hypertrophy. They were just doing doubles, triples, singles pretty much. So if we look at what's going on, it's so pretty much every time that you activate a particular connection, synaptic connection, between the neurons, that connection becomes stronger over and over and over. The grease the groove is the analogy is that command that's coming in from your brain to your muscles, that's the groove. That's that pathway. And the more you use it, pretty much the more greased it becomes. So it's like becomes a superconductor. So in the future, you don't have to try as hard to lift the same amount of weight, or you can try the same amount and you can lift harder. So we haven't even addressed the neural drive yet. We just pretty much made the motor neurons more responsive to it. It's a very easy and very simple way to train. And strength comes very easily and very, very unexpectedly. To make sure that it does happen, you have to address the issue of specificity. So specificity pretty much means, without getting too much into the weeds, to get stronger, first of all, you need to lift weights that are heavy enough. And if you're looking about percentages of 1 rep max, we're looking at 75 to 85 typically. If you go too light, you don't make the impression on your nervous system, and it's just not specific enough. If you go too heavy, very quickly you're just gonna burn yourself out. And so pretty much it's a weight that's heavy enough to respect, and light enough not to feel. And the second of all, and this is very surprising, is you only do about half or fewer reps that you possibly could do. So for example, let's say that you're lifting 80% of your 1 rep max. And let's say that you're able to do 8 reps maximum with it. We're just fairly common. Well, you're only going to do about 3 to 4 reps per set, and that's it. And the gym bros at this point go crazy, like, where's the intensity? Well, intensity in strength training is just how heavy the weight is. It has nothing to do with the effort. And it's been proven over and over that that's much more important than how hard you're exerting yourself. There are times for that. There are absolutely times for that. But if the weight is heavy enough, and if you do half the repetitions that you possibly could do, you're going to get stronger. It's very safe, and you're not going to burn out psychologically, and it's also very easy on your body. So also that builds muscle as well, purely because you're able to do a very high volume of work. I'm not able to explain the mechanism, why it builds muscle, but as the Soviets found out in weightlifting research, there's a correlation between the volume and Robert Roman, between the volume and the hypertrophy, everything else being equal, you're going to get bigger. So almost every day you're doing the sets of 3-4 reps, maybe even 5, and they start adding up. And before you know it, you're stronger, and at the same time you have developed muscle. So to summarize the Grease the Groove, you're trying to train moderately heavy as often as possible while staying as fresh as possible. And if you decide to do it in the gym, a very simple protocol would be a set every 10 minutes. It sounds really bizarre. Like, why? Why would you rest for so long? This apparently has to do with initial memory consolidation. There's so much is still unknown. So we do know the Grease the Groove works great, but we speculate that some of it has to do with some of the same phenomena related to learning in other fields. So if you're doing something over and over, like you're saying 2 + 2 is 4, 2 + 2 is 4, you're just using your short-term memory. You're not memorizing anything. But if you say 2 + 2 is 4, you go get a coffee, you come back and you try 2 + 2, 4. So there's that desirable difficulty that you have in there, and you have to process that instead of just go through the groove. That apparently helps this adaptation. So rest for at least 10 minutes. Do sets of about the repetitions of half of what you're possibly able to do. And, listen to your body. Typically train 2-3 days in a row and then take a day off, but listen to your body. So if you put yourself on that channel, and if you keep lifting this moderately heavy weights with a moderate effort over and over and over, you're going to get strong. It's one of the many ways to get strong.
Are you doing anything in the rest periods between these 10 minutes? So is it, let's say, bench press, wait 10 minutes till you bench press again, but in the meantime you're doing Zercher squat 5 minutes after the first bench press?
That's one of the ways to do that. You can do up to 3 exercises at the same time. So let's say like Zercher squat and bench press and maybe a third thing, but I'd say those 2 are enough. And another option is you can do that. You can incorporate this into, if you would do only 1 exercise, you can squeeze it into your lifestyle or your athletic practice. So what they would even do, some coaches do so-called strength warm-up. They would warm up as usual for a track class, let's say, track practice. Then they would do, let's say, 3 sets of 3 or something like with 80% max, which is not much. And they start their practice. Then the coach noticed that the athletes are starting to droop a little. He'll repeat that, he might repeat that up to 3 times. So what you have is, by having this short, very small dose, like a nano practice of strength, you rejuvenate yourself and your productivity increases so much. So whether you want to just do the strength exercise, several of them in that 1-hour period, or whether you want to combine that with writing a great American novel, that's your business.
I suppose if someone has access to the appropriate equipment at home, you could incorporate Grease the Groove into your entire day.
That's ideal, yes. Yeah. And obviously it's difficult with some equipment, but what you could do, you could use the heavy-duty grippers. You could do 1-arm push-ups. You could keep a kettlebell under your desk and press it at every opportunity. And again, the idea is really just practice. You just try to hit a perfect rep.